In the red corner, we have the TCL C8K, 98 inches wide and weighing in at 123.5 pounds. And in the blue corner, we have the behemoth. It's the Hisense U7Q. And standing at 100 inches wide, weighing in at 140 pounds, it's the Hisense U7Q. Now, both of these TVs are packed with the latest technology from both respective brands. We have 4K displays, mini LED backlighting, full of HDR features, and all the gaming tech you could possibly want. The purpose of today's video is to show you which one you should spend your dollars on. So let's get to it. Both TVs feature their latest quantum dot panels with mini backlight technologies from Hisense and TCL. Both TVs have a VA type panel. However, the TCL is implementing this year something called their Crisp Glow panel technology, which should essentially improve wide viewing angles, as VA type panels are known for having quite heavy color shift when you go off angle. So we'll be interested to see how that pans out. TCL claims a whopping 5,000 nits peak brightness for the C8K, while the U7K is claiming 2,400 nits. So now we're going to get to the testing. So the items that we're looking for is peak brightness, local dimming performance, contrast and shadow detail, and color punch. So we're going to play some HDR and SDR demo content, and we'll make some observations, and then you can be the judge yourself. So let's get to it. So in terms of peak brightness, now this is a 4K HDR demo from Sony. The first thing I'm noticing is that the TCL is way brighter. The colors are just so much more punchy, but around those objects that are really bright with a dark background, the local dimming is just spot on. I am absolutely impressed of the quality of this LCD TV. The colors, the brightness is there, and I can clearly see the Hisense colors are really faded and washed out. If you told me that wasn't a QD panel, I would believe it. In terms of the categories that we were looking at today, the peak brightness, I don't even think they're in the same category. The TCL is screaming right now. That is absolutely incredible. Absolutely impressed with this. This is probably one of the biggest discrepancies I've seen between two different similarly leagued TVs. So this is a really, really great demo. So we'll switch over to some SDR and we'll see what we have to offer.
Now straight away, there is a clear difference in brightness between these two. The TCL gets noticeably brighter in highlights and just has more pop across the screen. Whites look cleaner, and despite both brands claiming to have quantum dot panels, color has a significantly stronger punch on the TCL. Now for context, both TVs were in their most accurate mode, filmmaker mode, with brightness set to maximum. The Hisense on the other hand is much more subdued. The brightness of the TV is considerably lower and the image has a slightly softer presentation. It is not dull, but it certainly does not have that aggressive punch that the TCL has. For sports fans like myself, when it comes to daytime viewing, they are both capable TVs and will get the job done. However, if your room has a lot of windows or any direct sunlight, you will definitely want to consider the C8K, as the brightness feels so effortless and punchy.
Okay, so we've just covered picture quality and brightness. We've done some HDR and SDR testing. So now we're moving over to gaming. The main things I'm going to be looking for is like the input lag. Another item I generally look at is pixel response times or pixel smearing. So let's get to it. Okay, so the first thing I'm noticing is the actual pixel smearing, which is the first thing I look for. So as I said, when you look around really quickly, it just shows you how legible the picture is. The pixels aren't fast enough, but in this TV, it's actually really decent. I'm actually really impressed how good this picture is. Now, again, it's not an OLED, but I also haven't tweaked too many of the settings, so I wanted to kind of see what these settings can do out of the box. The highlights in this TV are fantastic, and the actual differences between the dark and the black. This TV does a fantastic job. I can feel that the pixel response times are actually really decent. Input lag feels low. There's quite a lot of really nice contrast. Peak brightness is fantastic. Now, this is where it's going to get a little bit sticky. So when it comes to the Hisense, the first thing I will say is the color. The color is completely washed out. This is really bad. The blooming, the off-axis color shift is horrible, and I'll capture some of that and show you along the video. If I go into the game, you can just once again see the HDR specular highlights. The game looks really flat. There's a lot of lifted blacks. Let's see if I can get these two side by side. So if I can stand in the center here, that is a massive difference. The colors are there, the detail is here, like there's so much detail on the sides, even in the dark areas. This crisp glow panel is actually super impressive, and I'm coming over to this Hisense, and I can tell you now, the colors were bad standing in front. They're even worse now. The panel looks completely lifted and washed. All the blacks have gone to gray. Keeping in mind, these are pretty much settings out of the box. I've actually found Hisense to be probably one of the worst gaming TVs I've personally had. The pixel smearing is really bad. Things get really blurry really fast, and this actually has a higher refresh rate. The higher refresh rate should mean there's an improvement over the C8K, and it's really just not there. So I thought I'd just kind of get these TVs at the same space. So I'm not sure how well this is coming through the camera, but I can tell you in person, this is actually really embarrassing for the Hisense. If you can see on the TVs here, a lot of the detail is being lost on the Hisense in these darker areas. These highlights are so bright and punchy, and even standing here, the color shift is really minimal. And if we come over to the Hisense, the specular highlight is really flat. The detail in the dark areas is just really not there. This is a really amazing comparison. I'm just super disappointed with the way the Hisense TV has performed here. And I don't know what TCL are doing, but this TV is absolutely incredible for its size, its price point, and for an LCD TV. So in terms of build quality and design, it's a bit of a mixed bag. So I showed the remotes earlier. The Hisense has a solar panel on it, which I thought was kind of cool. Personally, I would have preferred the solar panel on the rear of the remote because it just takes up all this kind of space. But in terms of the build quality of the units, personally, for my tastes, I do prefer the TCL. It has this really cool zero border design, which brings the image right to the edge of the picture. It does make the TV feel much more premium just by looking at it. Now with the Hisense, again, I do not like the thick bezels and borders around the TV. It makes the TV feel and look a lot chunkier and thicker than it is. So my personal preference would be the TCL. What do you guys think? Let me know in the comments. Let's get down to the hot topic, pricing and bang for buck. Now, at the time of recording this video on an Australian retailer's website, JB Hi-Fi, the C8K was $7,995, where the U7Q was $5,945. Now, if we're talking dollar per inch, the TCL is $82 per inch and the Hisense is $60 per inch. It really comes down to budget, your taste, and your experience. If you don't care about picture quality, get the Hisense. It's cheaper, it's bigger, and to be honest, it was the reason I purchased it. It was a bigger TV and I wanted a bigger TV. However, if you do want quality and you don't mind spending a bit more, I can honestly tell you this TV is definitely more than 30% better than the Hisense. If you are a gamer, this TV is incredible. I'm actually really impressed with this TV. What surprised me though was how poorly Hisense performed in game mode. I do think the C8K was better than the Hisense in every way that we've measured today, but the Hisense wasn't horrible in, say, HDR or SDR. But when it came to gaming, the Hisense is absolutely atrocious. It's one of the worst gaming TVs I've ever played on. Again, if this is something that's important to you, say, if you want to have the best picture quality, if you are a sucker for peak brightness, and if you are a gamer, you can't go past this TV. This is an amazing TV. In terms of someone who owns several OLEDs, and I live on OLED, this is the best LCD TV I've personally had hands-on time in my own home. The C8K is truly the winner, and I believe I would recommend that to almost anyone in my family looking for a large screen display.
Here are some of my closing thoughts. I wanted to show more HDR content because this is where the difference between these two screens becomes the most obvious. On the TCL, HDR gaming genuinely looks fantastic. Bright highlights in explosions, reflections, and lighting effects all stand out. The colors look bold and rich without feeling oversaturated. Combined with stronger local dimming, it gives the image real depth. Games feel more alive and more dimensional. It feels like the TV is actually taking advantage of HDR. On the Hisense, the moment you launch a HDR game, you can tell it's not quite keeping up. The overall brightness feels pulled back and the colors look flatter. In the side-by-side shots, it really does come across as dull and a bit lifeless. I think the main issue with the Hisense is its PQ EOTF tracking. Now, PQ EOTF is the standard that tells the TV how to map light and shadow in HDR. If the TV follows it properly, you get strong contrast and depth. If it does not, HDR can end up looking washed out or overly grey. On the Hisense, the midtones are lifted more than they should be, which flattens the image. Shadows lose depth and highlights lose impact. This is why HDR on the Hisense does not land the same way as it does on the TCL. So after spending time with both of these displays, I think the comparison becomes quite clear once you get into HDR and gaming scenarios. Colors, shadows, and highlights all work together in a way that gives the image depth and presence. It feels considered and intentional. The Hisense, on the other hand, prioritizes size and value, and there is absolutely a market for that. If your main goal is to get the largest screen possible for movies, sports, and everyday viewing, it provides a genuinely enjoyable experience at a more accessible price. But when pushed into HDR, particularly with games, its tone mapping and brightness control hold it back. The image loses contrast and the sense of depth that HDR is intended to create. Now, it is worth mentioning, by the time that I finished putting this video together, the pricing had shifted. The Hisense U7Q was listed at $5,995 and the TCL C8K was $5,596. When the TCL becomes the less expensive option while delivering significantly stronger overall performance, that really changes the conversation. And at that point, TCL simply becomes the only intelligent option. So the decision really comes down to what matters more to you. If you value picture accuracy, strong HDR performance, and cinematic depth, the TCL is the better choice. If your priority is purely screen size and you are less concerned about HDR performance, the Hisense still has a place. But when the TCL is less expensive and better in every metric aside from being 2 inches smaller, there really isn't an argument for Hisense. TCL, you have my attention.